Welcome to our 2020 election town hall discussion from the Men's and Women's Department of the Citadel, Cathedral of Praise and Worship. Our topic tonight is discerning the critical time of our nation. Why are we here? We are praying and believing God for answers and opportunities that will empower us as a people. We have the power. Why vote? It is the mission of the Citadel Cathedral of Praise and Worship Church to encourage and support the total person in mind, body, and spirit to be responsive and responsible to God's call in and upon with critical issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, unemployment, police brutality, Supreme Court nominations, and more. It is the duty of the church to provide knowledge that will support voters in making informed choices that will ensure better lives and opportunities for all people. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge."
We again want to thank you so much for taking the time out to join the Citadel Cathedral as we inform ourselves in preparation for the upcoming election. If you have a question or comment to pose to our guest panelists, we will be utilizing the chat function on our Facebook live stream. We will do our very best to address as many questions as we can. In the event that we are unable to address your question, please email us at citadelsistersTtalk@gmail.com, and we will do our best to get the answers to you. This is a session geared primarily towards providing information for our community. Any views or opinions of our guest panelists do not represent the Citadel Cathedral of Praise and Worship unless explicitly stated. Any views or opinions expressed are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual. For more information about our church, please email us. Tonight's event will consist of discussion focused on matters concerning the upcoming election. Please govern yourselves accordingly to our house rules.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to the throne of grace, asking that you have your way in this town hall. Lord, you know what we need in this perilous times. Father, we need truth to become valued again. We need justice that will seek you, wisdom. We need leaders that have a heart for you. We need you, Lord, to thwart the efforts of those who will hinder the rights of the people to vote. You, God, are our only refuge. Father, open our hearts and minds to hear what we need to vote and make the right choices when we vote. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In tonight's program, we will have set up 3 sections. Town hall norms and expectations. We'll have panelist introduction, and then we'll have our Q&A session.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I'm so glad that you all have joined us tonight. And I'm grateful that in this setting that we're going to do ministry where ministry is to be done. Our moderator tonight is L. Joy Williams. She is no novice. She is no stranger. She is in the forefront of the political arena and has been instrumental in so many politicians' cabinet as she has endeavored to increase the quality of life in our community. So she has worked with us for the entire time. I've known her for many, many years. It was my brother, Dr. Edison Bond, that suggested that we get her for our moderator. And he was instrumental in securing her tonight in her busy schedule. She's a president of the NAACP Brooklyn chapter. She has her own consulting company, strategies for the community. She has a wealth of education and wisdom. And without any further ado, so we can get to the heart of the matter tonight, I want to present to some, introduce to others, L. Joy Williams, our moderator. The Lord bless you.
Thank you so very much, Bishop, and thank you to my Citadel family. I want to say first, I want to thank all of you, including you, Bishop, who continue to send Greater St. Stephen's your condolences on the passing of my uncle, my bishop, Marvin D. Williams. So I want to say thank you for your love, for your prayers, and continuing to keep our family uplifted. Tonight's conversation, as we said, is all about voting. And we want to make sure those of you who are watching or may watch this later are armed and prepared to cast your vote. Tomorrow begins early vote, and we'll get into that and talk about all of the precautions and steps that are being done to make sure you can cast your vote safely so that we can impact positively our community. We're going to have a great conversation with two friends. First, I'm going to start with Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, and she will take a moment while I fix my light to introduce herself.
It is truly an honor and a privilege to be with you on this evening with the Citadel family. Of course, you know, I always say that my godfather extended this invitation to me, and clearly he is still looking out for me, even though we are probably decades beyond that first opportunity that we had to meet at Downstate Hospital, where was one of my lowest points, but he stepped right on in and helped me back to health so that here I can, you know, run for office. And I think I was running for office at that time too. I was running for district leader. And, you know, running for office is not for the faint at heart. Let's just say that. And, but now I am in the New York State Assembly, and I proudly represent the neighborhoods of Brownsville, East New York, Ocean Hill, Crown Heights, East Flatbush, and East New York. I was elected in 2014, but, you know, I really consider myself to be a voting rights lawyer, an election lawyer, an election advocate. Because we recognize that it may have taken us 400 years or 401 years to get to this point. But our voting rights is something that is not an inalienable right. If we do not use it, we will lose it. And every year that the Voting Rights Act has to be reauthorized, yes, reauthorized, it just really invigorates the fact that we recognize how important it is. The state budget is, you know, $52 billion every year. That money gets, you know, allocated throughout all of our communities. And when you don't show up to the polls, when you don't complete your census, even though I recognize that the census period has now left us, we lose out and we mute our advocacy because the resources that needs to go behind it, it goes out the window to communities who are actually utilizing the franchise. I will always remember the first day, or one of the first days when I got to Albany, and folk looked at me and said, well, you represent Brownsville? Well, that community doesn't vote. You know, people in public housing don't vote, which was a flat out lie. However, we need to ratchet up that experience. And I am hoping that after tonight's panel, that people will be invigorated to go out tomorrow and show up Georgia and show up all of those other states that have the lines that are wrapped around the corner for early voting, and let people know that this is the first opportunity that we have to vote early for president. We know that the soul to the polls Sunday is what took President Barack Obama over the finish line. So let's do it again. And the one way that we know that we can do it now is because we've done it before, and we definitely have. So thank you so much again for having me. And I look forward to the discussion along with my sister, Al Joy, and of course, Councilmember Robert Cornegy.
Well, thank you very much, Assemblywoman. And also, as you mentioned, we have with us this evening, Councilmember Robert Cornegy, and we want to give him a few moments to either introduce, but I'm probably sure he doesn't need to introduce himself to Citadel, but at least give some opening comments as well.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Bishop. I want to thank you for allowing me to share in this information, which is critically important. But before I start, I'm going to probably blur the lines of church and state by starting out by saying that I want to give honor to God, who is clearly the head of my life. I think, you know, that's important to say. I mean, we all followers on this call, Joy and the Assemblywoman, and have bumped into each other in probably every church in this great borough. But I am currently the council member that represents the great villages of Bedford-Stuyvesant and Northern Crown Heights. In the New York City Council, I am the chair of the Democratic Conference. I'm on leadership, the budget negotiation team, and I also currently chair the Committee on Housing and Buildings, which is obviously critically important when we talk about affordable housing, making sure that there's a pathway to home ownership, not just low-income housing, but the ability to own a piece of the American dream. We are also responsible for paving that way. So although a lot of the issues around voting, voter rights, as was mentioned by my colleague, rest on the state and federal level, we here on the ground, like myself, are responsible for making sure the polls are prepared and ready for us, whether it's early voting, which begins tomorrow, or whether it's mail-in voting or ranked choice voting, which is coming up very shortly, and will have an impact on communities of color. So I'm just glad to be here to represent this local branch of government and talk about all the work that's necessary over the next couple of weeks to ensure that there is no voter fraud or voter disenfranchisement to people all over this great city, and in particular this great borough. So thank you.
I want to thank both of you for giving those opening comments. And our job here this evening is to make sure that the people who are watching us or listening to us have the information that they need in order to participate in the elections this year. So this year, there are a number of ways you can cast your vote. And we want to make sure that people know all of their options of how to do it safely, but also hear how the city and the state is preparing people in order to keep them safe as they either venture out or vote by mail if that is what they choose to do. So we're going to start first by talking about preparing for the ballot. What should voters know is on the ballot? And I'll start with the Assemblywoman before you go to the polls.
I learned recently that it's a foolish frog that doesn't celebrate or praise his own pond. So I'm on the ballot, and there are also a number of other state elected offices which are on the ballot. So your assembly seats are up, as well as our Senate seats. Also, running every 2 years are our congressional representatives. So of course, depending on where you live, Congresswoman Clark, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Nydia Velasquez, and congressional members from all across the state. And going right on up, we have the opportunity to elect the very first Black woman nominee to the office of Vice President, and none other than Kamala Harris. And I know that the Citadel does not express necessarily their interests in who we vote for, but I'm going to say that I'm voting for her. Of course, Kamala Harris for Vice President. And then we know that there is a game-changing opportunity upon us. We are seeing that women, families, children all across the country are being ravaged by the inconsistencies which are taking place in Washington, D.C. at the White House right now. We've lived through COVID, and it ravaged our communities and was taking people out of here left, right, front, and center without any rhyme or reason. And it is because of the sheer inexperience of the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So it's time for him it's time for us to give him a big old eviction notice. And so at the top of the ticket is the office of the President of the United States. And I am voting for none other than Joe Biden. And I invite you to join with me as we continue to do the people's work in advocating for those particular seats. So of course, there are our state seats and our federal seats are up as well.
So, council member, we talk about all of the people who will appear on the ballot, but to talk about what options we have, there are 3 ways to vote. You can vote absentee, you're voting by mail. You can vote early, which I'm going to ask you about. And then you can also vote on our tried and true election day. What are the, I wouldn't say there are cons, but to ask the question, what are the pros of voting early?
Well, definitely the wait times across the country have demonstrated that people are coming out to cast their vote. And there's an opportunity to vote early so that there's no mishaps, nothing happens. Like if you have an opportunity and you have the capacity to vote early, I suggest you vote early. I'll be voting tomorrow first thing as soon as they open. I want my voice heard immediately without any barriers. I don't want to have to consider the wait times. I don't want to be turned away for broken machines. I want to be there, you know, and have my ballot counted as early as possible. There are, if I'm not mistaken, 50 million Americans have already voted. So really, it's up to you. And some people are literally chomping at the bit to be able to get out and cast their vote. So, you know, I think that's an important way to demonstrate your commitment to having your voice heard, is to get out and vote early if you have the capacity to do it.
I think that's an important point that you mentioned, council member, there at the end, that if you can. And the reason why we have these additional opportunities is obviously we are in a middle still of a pandemic, and we want to make sure that folks are safe. And so we'll talk about a little later what the safety precautions the city is putting into place and how you can still exercise your vote, even if you don't want to venture out into the crowds. So we're going to continue on to the discussion talking about voter suppression. This is something that I can tell you Latrice and I work really hard on together. Her as an election lawyer, me knowing the election law and just don't have a law degree.
Not yet. But, there's still time.
Fighting voter suppression is something also that the NAACP is consistently the forefront of our issues. So what precautions, first we'll start with the assembly member, and then council member, if you can chime in as well, to talk about what the state and the city are doing in order to prevent voter suppression at the polls this year.
Well, I will, I guess begin by stating that, of course, our New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, has an entire unit within the Office of the Attorney General that's devoted to voter protection. And I think that it's honorable and admirable of her to do that, since we've seen so many other states across the country utilize the Office of the Attorney General as a sword instead of as a shield and a protectant, as our Attorney General has been. And so she's also been providing voter trainings for people who want to be poll watchers on election day, and a number of other opportunities. But one of the ways that we have that we can vote this year is, of course, we can vote by mail. We don't necessarily have a vote by mail system yet in the state of New York. So hopefully there's a portion here where we can advocate for new laws. But now the governor has allowed for voters in New York State to elect to vote by mail due to COVID-19. However, it's very important how you complete and fill out that ballot, because one of the ways that we've seen the most egregious effects of voter suppression is on straight up people's votes and ballots just being thrown out the window as if they are invalid, simply because they didn't sign in the right place, they didn't check the right box. And so if you are electing to vote by mail and vote by absentee ballot, and if you are not sure as to how to complete that ballot, I will state that I'm sure you can reach out to my office as well as any elected official's office for guidance with respect to how to complete the envelope and also the ballot to make sure that your vote is counted. In addition to that, another thing that we have seen done across the state is a voter purge, right? And if you had not voted in the last two federal elections. That means that, you know, you voted for president in, I don't know, 2016. You, well, maybe if you sat that one out, let's say, like the last time you voted, you wanted to vote for Barack Obama, you went and you did that and you didn't vote in 2016. And then 2018 came around, you didn't vote again. But you see this presidential election coming back up again and you want to run down to the polls to make sure that your vote counts. And lo and behold, you get there and you find that your name is no longer on that roll. That's because, again, if you miss 2 consecutive federal elections, your vote will be purged. You probably received a notice in the mail from the Board of Elections that many people don't open. Or if you did open it, it probably was too late because the mail was too slow with respect to your response. And so we have opportunities that are set in place where if you show up to the poll site on election day, or even at any of the early voting sites, where we are preparing attorneys to be able to go to court or go down to the Board of Elections to ensure that you have an opportunity to vote and that your vote will remain a valid vote. I'm trying to think of some other things. Of course, there's voter intimidation that takes place, where people will be outside on election day. And you know, some people think about voter intimidation. They think about the South, where, you know, Bull Connor got the dogs and the hoses and everybody outside. But also think about some of these unscrupulous candidates who will have some of their folk outside straight up starting fights, like I've seen in many elections, including some of the elections that I've been involved in as a candidate, but I'm not gonna say no names today. But people have utilized a number of opportunities in order for people to restrict your vote, even at poll sites. And so again, one of the things that we're learning, of course, through, I'm gonna say the Honorable Esmeralda Simmons, is really the vigor, the know-how. She gives us the tools with respect to fighting voter suppression. And it's something that, you know, we vow each and every day to make sure that we're ensuring. So if you're interested in being a poll watcher, please do contact my office. Again, the telephone number for my office is 718-342-1256. That's 718-342-1256. We will not engage you with respect to any particular candidate. This is just about the VOTE and making sure that the tenets and the elements of the Voting Rights Act is something that everyone has an opportunity to realize and everyone has an opportunity to enjoy. So I'll turn it over to Rob if he wants to chime in. But of course, Joy and I can kind of do this voter suppression, voter protection thing all day, because I haven't even touched on all of the elements of trickery that gets performed in order to keep you from voting, like moving poll sites. But I digress.
Well, council member, I want you to also touch upon this, and you know this as a former, a district leader. And what happens if someone, as the Assemblywoman mentioned, shows up on election day or either at their early voting site and they're turned away? They said their name is not there, or that they're not registered.
You should demand an affidavit ballot. You can demand that at any poll site that you show up to, and they turn you away and say you're not a part of the rolls. You should demand an affidavit ballot. I want to say that as a former district leader, the role of the district leader is to travel around to the poll sites that are in their assembly district to make sure that the machines are actually working and make calls. So while you guys handle the heavy business, people like myself are responsible for the day-to-day operations and making sure that the machines are operational and making sure that the poll workers, which has changed tremendously. This will be the first year that we'll have so many young poll workers that have been assigned to the polls. And that's important because they're energetic, they have knowledge. It's a long day to be a poll site worker. And sometimes you can get frustrated. We are expecting incredible turnout, even though we're in a pandemic. You can see by the lines that there's been incredible turnout. There's no reasonable expectation that we won't have the same circumstances here in New York City. So in the city, we travel around, and I travel around to make sure that the poll sites are actually operational, and where they're not, and also whether they're opened on time and whether they're closing on time. So the logistical stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis, I find myself responsible for, which is, that's pretty important. If you wake up in the morning and go to your poll site and it hasn't opened yet, right? That's actually, it rises to the level of calling both of you about voter disenfranchisement or voter fraud or any of those kind of things. If someone's ability to vote is impeded by the conditions, whether or not there's handicap accessibility, whether or not all of those kinds of things are the daily operations, and I'm responsible for that. And the mayor has just announced that he has solicited for and has put together a team of folks voluntarily who are election lawyers who will be traveling around the city that we can reach relatively quickly if they see a consistent pattern of behavior that rises to the level of disenfranchisement. Or, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, no problem. Council member, that's really important because, I say all the time that voter suppression does not require malicious intent. So we often think about voter suppression as someone in the KKK, some evil white man trying to say these Negroes can't vote. But moving poll sites at the last minute, not accurately having enough of the machines or materials at the poll site, not having ample time for people to register, all of those things are also voter suppression. Because if you're making policy and laws that impede upon people's right to vote, then that contributes to voter suppression. So we need to get out of the mindset of thinking that there's some evil person behind the curtain and think about globally and holistically about the laws that we have in place and how we can dismantle them to make sure people have a right to vote.
Remember, all of our offices got calls during the primary about the fact that there was supposed to be 2 sheets. Right? That's the kind of stuff I have to deal with on a daily basis. And I got tremendous calls about the fact that people were like, what, there's another sheet? So they had actually cast their vote, left the poll site, and then talked to somebody else who said that there were 2 sheets. And we had to determine whether or not they could go back and do that second sheet. It was an absolute disaster. Those are the day-to-day operational barriers that some people find. That's horrible. That's worse than Bull Connor, where you've gotten an opportunity to vote, you go in to vote, you cast your vote and wasn't given the correct information or all of the tools to vote. So we just experienced that.
Yeah. That is definitely something that we have to be mindful of. And as we move the conversation to talk about how we continue stay engaged, this is something that's near and dear to my heart about beyond election day. How do we stay civically engaged? I'm going to be repeating all of my sayings tonight, I guess. My other saying is that civics doesn't begin and end on election day, that we as a community, we as a people need to be consistently engaged in the people that we elect to govern us. So as we move beyond the election, and oh my God, I so can't wait to get beyond this election. Y'all have no idea how long this election cycle has been. We want to talk about, and I'll start with you, council member, about some of the options that we have of staying engaged, staying civically engaged beyond the election season.
So obviously what we just experienced in terms of responsible and protest and demonstration is one of the ways that a lot of policy and even budgetary decisions were made in this particular cycle. So I want to take my hat off to the young people and everybody who took to the streets and demonstrated and protested for what they believed was right. It moved the needle on city, state, and the federal level. Well, not so much the federal level, but the city and state level. The needle got moved based on that. And then there's the on-the-ground civic engagement that takes place through either relationships with the community board, civic organizations like the NAACP, down to your tenant association and block association. There is no shortage of ways to get involved and stay and remain civically engaged. And then there's now the ecumenical community, Citadel in particular, who's stepping up and demanding accountability from its elected officials, but also delivering information. So there's no excuse, I think, going forward to become involved in your community board, your tenant association, your block association, and now even your church with Bishop like Bishop Bond who is really taking a mantle of delivering and not being regimented in this idea of the separation of church and state. I respect that idea, but your constituents are my constituents, and we have to have a joint way of getting their needs met. So I'm going to tell you that I don't want to hear from anybody going forward in 2021 about their inability to engage with the political process, or more importantly, like you mentioned, civic engagement. There's a myriad of ways to do that.
Yeah, and you know, there's ways even as churches that we have historically been involved in advocacy for our communities, and you know, we will continue to build coalitions and make sure that churches, clergy, others have the tools and resources for them and their institution to be involved. Assemblymember, talk a bit about the importance and how, continuing on the vein from the council member, how partnerships and coalition help you as a legislator in your position to serve your constituents.
Absolutely. So, you know, I guess building upon what the council member said, so he, you know, mobilized everyone to get together on the ground. And once you're together and everyone is, you know, has their mission and has their plan in place, now it's time for you to take that mission and speak truth to power, where there is an Esther moment for each and every one of us to go to the King, no matter what the circumstances are, because the lives, and not just our lives, but our livelihoods depend upon it. And so there are buses that come to Albany on a regular basis, on a daily basis. There are groups of individuals who have press conferences and protests outside on the steps of City Hall, on Borough Hall, on a regular basis. There are groups that go down to Washington, D.C. to the Capitol on a regular basis. But the question you have to ask yourself is, how many times have you got on that bus? And I don't mean just because we got that one opportunity where our leaders are calling us to Washington, to the mall. But no, for you to have regular meetings scheduled and set up many times through the NAACP Brooklyn branch, where you are going into elected officials' offices and speaking directly to them and their staff, saying these are the issues that are important to us. Affordable housing is affordable to whom? These are the income limits that we want you to consider when you're speaking about affordable housing, because we don't believe that our message is being carried, even to the extent where there may be some bills that were already passed, like the automatic voter registration bill, which are sitting on the desk of the governor right now. Well, we can call up to the governor. If you don't want to go up, you can, of course, always pick up the phone, email, Instagram, Facebook, utilize social media, because many of us utilize our own social media platforms, sometimes to the dismay of our staff, but you know, I'm on it. And so whenever people are commenting, you know, other people get an opportunity to see that. And we always want to look, you know, in the best light, because you're only as good as your most previous election. And so people are going to be responsive to the things that you bring to them. So don't ever think that, you know, you're not enough, or that your vote doesn't matter, or that all politicians, all they do is lie. They don't listen to what we have to say anyway, because they are listening. And that type of a disbelief that they have instilled in us to think that we don't matter is what holds us down and keep us from actually realizing the prize that we're looking for, because we're just not there. And so I know Joy has been using her isms, but the ism that I always love to use is one from Congresswoman Clark, when everyone was talking about the Tea Party, and they were saying, oh, the Tea Party is crazy, the Tea Party is crazy, and because they used to show up on the mall with their shotguns and this and that and the next thing. And she always said, well, crazy showed up. And when crazy showed up, crazy got listened to. And not only did they get listened to, but they took over Washington, D.C. And we are seeing movements all across the state, of course, with the DSA and other groups who have said enough is enough. And they're tired of being on the sidelines. And they want to make sure that now their advocacy actually sits within the halls of of the Assembly and the Senate and Congress, and they've made some moves. So it's time for each and every one of us to make those same moves and mobilize our ability to organize on the ground to our ability to organize within those chambers where the decisions are being made each and every day.
Yes, we invite anyone to join us on those buses when we can go back to the Capitol, but also to be a part of our ongoing advocacy. As both the council member and the assembly member can tell you, we call, we do meetings, and we engage on the issues, and in the instances where they are aligned with us, you know, we are wholeheartedly support of them on that. But as NAACP says, our focus is on permanent interest. And so we invite all to join us in that continued advocacy beyond Election Day, because after you elect people, you know, you then have to continue to talk to them. Right. And believe me, as the Assemblywoman said, there are plenty of people talking to them. And you want to make sure that, particularly if you're the constituent, you want your representatives to hear directly from you on issues from the budget to what we're going to talk about now, talking about COVID, and how our state and our city recovers from being severely impacted by this pandemic. And we need to make sure that our elected representatives, when they go in that room, because we won't be in there physically with them, but we need to send them in the room with their marching orders. We need to send them in the room to make sure they have at the top of mind not what's on the best interest for those who are wealthy, not only what's in the best interest of lobbyists and, you know, special and corporate interests, but making sure that they have our best interests at heart. So we're going to talk about that now, talking about the city and state's response following being hit so hard by COVID. We don't know how long the impact of the pandemic will be. And folks, I can tell you, in having the conversation now with council members, with assembly members, senators, even the governor, they are already trying to prepare us. Things gonna be tight. We ain't got no money. But we know that we need to make sure that when they're negotiating what relief and support can be provided to businesses, for those who are unemployed, we need them to be armed with the information to think about what's in their best interest for the constituents. So, council member, talk a bit about that. I know the city is dealing in real time the economic impact that we have all felt from the pandemic. Talk a bit about how the city is meeting the needs in real time.
First of all, thank you, Joy, for that. But first of all, we are in a $9 billion budget deficit due to COVID spending. If you could imagine, and I tell people all the time, you know, the budget is how we fund through our discretionary funding and our capital funding, the very programs that are everything from alternative to incarceration to senior OACH program, which is the older adults technology program. Like, all of that comes from the city's, you know, budget. And with a $9 billion deficit, we took 15% cuts across the board to everyone from the police department to the Department of Education. Suffered 15% cuts across the board. What that means is a lot of the programs that we're used to experiencing don't exist. We've tried to do everything from wait on the federal government and the President of the United States to create a stimulus package that not only helps small businesses, but helps the city and fill that budget gap, to coupling with the state to be able to do some borrowing. And right now, neither one of those things has happened. And, you know, that kind of has been pushed down the road. The president said he ain't doing nothing until after the election. So ain't nobody getting no extra money, especially if he's not president. Like, so he's been a real baby about taking care of his home state, which is crazy. So what that means on the ground for the average person is that the programs that you're accustomed to accessing, everything from after school to, you know, summer youth programs, have taken an incredible hit. So, and going forward, we don't know where that money is going to come from. So we're tightening our belts as a city, and by tightening our belts means cutting back on programs. Access to food security is one of the biggest problems that we're having right now, and finding money to fund everything from Open Door Family Life to Campaign Against Hunger, which has been on the front lines every day since the pandemic, feeding folks with supplemental food. We're not in a great situation, but we found a way to plug some of the holes, but there has been absolutely a 15% cut across the board with all agencies and all programs. As you can see, there was a cut to sanitation, and that's evident if you go into any community, especially Black communities. You can see the garbage piling up incredibly. The sanitation department is saying that's based on the cuts. We have other ideas about why that is, but arguably, those cuts are impacting us in everything from sanitation to education to healthcare.
Certainly, if the city is facing that, Assemblywoman, what is the overall state facing?
Well, one of the things that we just noticed was that during the course of COVID-19, when we were the hardest hit through, March through June, I'll say, one of the top sort of constituency services meetings that we've had to engage in was, quite frankly, unemployment. People were having problems with filing their unemployment because we went from, let's say, maybe about 60,000 applications to 400,000 applications like overnight. And the servers were down. They weren't able to withstand that type of activity. So we had to sort of jump into play. I don't know if you remember when we went to Albany in the middle of the pandemic in order to pass the budget, and as well as to give the governor spending power through COVID-19. So one of the things that had to be done was really to ratchet up the Department of Labor's sort of technology infrastructure in order to meet the demands. And then there were these additional payments that were made for people who were receiving unemployment once we were able to get through. And so just recently, the state requested through FEMA an additional $300, and piggybacking off of what Rob said in terms of the federal government not responding to, the state of New York. He just flat out denied the $300 additional payments in unemployment. And we have seen that, people are still facing financial hardships with respect to paying rent and as well as paying their mortgage. Of course, we heard putting food on the table and really just sort of pocketbook issues that we thought maybe we would never be able to get back into. And so there was a $25 million sort of spending opportunity that we put in place. I anticipate that we'll have to go back up again very soon, perhaps after this election, in order to expand that, because we're going to have to figure out how do we brace ourselves and sort of undergird and subsidize a lot of our public hospitals. We saw what was happening in Brookdale Hospital, Interfaith Hospital, and what happens when hospitals are sort of busting at the seams and people are walking in and not being able to get the service that's provided. And one of the things that I've noticed as well is that when they were drawing out these sort of red zones, orange zones, yellow zones, one of the lines cut off right at Linden Boulevard. So that said to me that either Linden Boulevard was the beginning of where they were cutting off or the end. But notwithstanding that, I know that Linden Boulevard is where Brownsville begins and East New York begins in some instances. And so it was like a blatant, statement to us that yet again, when this pandemic comes back around, that Black lives may matter in front of the Barclays Center, but in front of Brookdale Hospital, that Black life doesn't matter as much with respect to the budget and healthcare and really putting out, a number of the things that we need. That being said, with respect to COVID-19 testing, we were able to advocate to get the first walk-up testing site at BMS on Rockaway Avenue. But even again, when you don't use something, you lose it. So this big tent that was out in order to make sure that our people knew their status, because you just like, during the AIDS crisis, you had to know your status then, you have to know your status now. You have to know your status, because you don't want to be the super spreader junior, like, you know, the other super spreader that we know down in DC. But we have to prepare ourselves. Contact tracing is very important. You have to be involved in that. People are saying, okay, well, you know, I don't want to get tested. I don't know what they're putting up my nose, into my brain. And I'm not talking about, you know, what's that? What do they call it when they do the thing? Why am I losing my train of thought? But when they give you something to prevent you from getting the virus.
Oh, the vaccine.
I'm not talking about that. I am saying, though, that it's important for each and every one of us to get involved in contact tracing, so that we are protecting our seniors who are back home. I want to do everything it is in our power to make sure that we are raising awareness around this thing, and we are able to hit it before it hits us. Because the last time when it was going around, people were saying, oh, Black people ain't going to get coronavirus, until we did. And so we're, you know, again, doing what we have to do, making sure that the resources are available to be able to help subsidize some of the families and the constraints that we're going through, support our local hospitals and our safety net hospitals to be able to provide the services that are necessary, support our federally qualified healthcare facilities to be able to provide the services that are necessary for our families, watch out what's going on in NYCHA in terms of the privatization of NYCHA and making sure that people who have stuck it out in our neighborhoods remain there. And of course, our fight is really on so many different levels. And while we know, we've heard before that while if America catches a cold, our communities have the flu. So if America got COVID-19, I don't even know what we got, bubonic plague or something, but whatever it is that we have, we got to make sure that we are working doubly hard in order to make sure that the blow, we're able to withstand it.
Well, thank you so very much, Councilmember Cornegy and Assemblywoman Walker. We thank you so very much for sharing that information. Whether or not we are taking a bus to Albany or we're doing it by Zoom or some other platform, we're going to continue to engage and have conversations with those who elect us, because how can someone represent you if they never hear from you? So we want to make sure that those of you who are watching and listening will have the information that you need. You can engage with Brooklyn and NAACP. Again, early voting starts tomorrow. Polls open at 10 a.m. You can go to vote.nyc.gov to find where your poll location is. Your early vote site may not be the same site that you're used to going to vote. So it's very important that as you prepare yourself, just like you prepare yourself to go to service, when you go to service, I know I was taught before I go to service, I read my Bible before I go to service, I say my prayer before I go to service to put myself in the mindset of being in the house of worship. And the same thing we want to do when we go to vote. We want to know what's on the ballot. We want to make sure that we know what poll site we're supposed to show up at, and then make our plan to vote by knowing what time you're going to do it and what day you're going to do it. Because study shows when you have a plan that you will actually execute that. So I want to say to our gracious hosts to thank you so very much for inviting us for the conversation this evening. And I guess I turn it back over to you, Bishop.
Wait, before the bishop goes back on, I'm wondering what kind of budget Citadel has to get L. Joy Williams, man. You must got a crazy budget over there, Bishop.
I'm grateful for L. Joy Williams. I'm grateful for L. Joy Williams. She was instrumental many years ago in me going to Israel along with the politicians on a peace journey there when they were going through so much. With what they were going through at those times, and we went there on a peace journey. It was very great. But I'm grateful I was able to call on her to come and to facilitate the session between these two politicians. I want to say that I am, just like after hearing the debate last night, and number 45, who says that he is the less racist person in the room. Which probably meant he was the only person in the room. But in addition to that, and he's done more for us Black and brown people since Abraham Lincoln. When we go hear all these things, it really makes us want to get involved so that we can help our people to be informed about what we can do, and not so they won't feel that it's like so big that my vote does not count. Everybody vote counts, and we're trying to do all in our power to make sure our seniors have a way to the polls, or if they want to do, voting through the mail, we're trying to make sure that everyone that wants to vote in our congregation can vote, and even in our community, we're trying to make sure that everybody gets to the poll. We need all hands on deck. I really enjoyed the conversation tonight. I think that maybe there may be some of the questions that people have in the chat that they would like to ask today. I think that Sister Bronte might have those questions.
Yes, I'm here. So we can go to the first question. The first question was around the role of the church in terms of getting the people, our citizens, to mobilize. What can the church do to be more active in connecting people to our representatives? I know that this is a start, but after the election, what are some of the actions that we can take as a church to inform our congregation?
I know that there are a lot of clergy organizations that are in the business of mobilizing the church. And I'm not going to speak for the vice president of one of the most illustrious of those organizations, which is Assemblymember Latrice Walker. I'll let her say that, but I know that there are church organizations who have decided that they want to have an impact inside and outside of elections. And I guess she could speak about the African-American clergy and elected officials and the great work that they do.
Well, the history of the African-American clergy and elected officials organization was basically steeped in recognizing how important it was to elect the first African-American mayor in the city of New York. And the same vigor from its founders, which we celebrate regularly, is the fact that we know that no matter whenever someone is running for office, the first place that they go to is the church. And just like everyone else has their Bill of Rights that they are expecting when people are elected, that you're not just making, promises, but that you're actually going to follow through. And so this is the only organization, I'll say, in the state, which is literally a group of elected officials and clergy who come together once a month in order to just go back and forth on ideas. Individuals who are involved in the church, whether they be pastors, bishops, whatever your office is, they have a platform by which they say and ask questions. Senator Chuck Schumer is there on a regular basis. We've had the lieutenant governor who comes through all the time. And so it's a really, really good meeting where you have a number of judges, senators, congressional members. Of course, Congressman Jeffries is also a vice chair. And so you can, of course, be a part of that. It meets every first Friday of the month at Antioch Baptist Church, where the Reverend Dr. Robert Waterman is the pastor. And its COO is none other than Dee Bailey. If you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to any of those two individuals. But you can do a lot of organizing right there, in your church. Set up an ad hoc committee, which really just deals with, voting and meet regularly and come up with your agenda and just meet with some of your local elected officials, whether it is your council member or your assembly member. But you have to make sure that there's a group of people who are having meetings with their elected officials regularly. I have meetings together with Councilwoman Alika Ampry Samuel, where we meet every third Saturday of the month at 10 a.m. We used to hold this meeting in our district office, but of course now due to COVID-19 restrictions, we'll be meeting virtually. So I would also say to contact my district office in order to, get the Zoom information in terms of how we can move forward with that. And then also, if you can't think of any other opportunity to really get organized, let's get organized by making sure that all of our families have the required PPE, sanitizer, etc. that folk need, and reach out to your elected officials, because they have stacks and stacks and stacks of these things, whether they're in their offices or unless they have maybe some access to it. And I don't want to be walking down the street and seeing that this crisis is upon us and people are not protected with the PPE that is necessary. So you can reach out to your elected officials on that. So it could be something very small, as just going to a meeting, or something really large about there being a priority that the church wants to see happen. And how do you push that in order to become a reality?
But I also just want to add really quickly, the church has always been the clearinghouse for movements, especially as it relates to Black people. Without the church, there's no civil rights movement, there's no bus boycotts, there's no like the church was central to our struggle as a Black people. There's no reason that should be separated. Every great movement for Black people in America has come through the church, mosque, synagogue, church, mosque, and the ecumenical community. But the church has always been the place for organizing in basements across this country for movement. We can return back to that greatness.
I know, exactly. I'm seeing here that Edison Bond said that the Black church has been the central unit. I know you're frat, but I'm representing too. But yeah, so we just gotta know our power. Like, we gotta walk in our zhuzh, as they say, and really just make sure that we know that there is no winning of any election anywhere unless they come through the Black church. And we dub it the Black church or whatever. It's just church, but everyone knows it, everyone recognizes it. And then every time, I always love it when people say, oh, the only time politicians come to our church is when it's election time. That ain't their fault. That's your fault. Because you're not holding them accountable to coming back and saying, these are our priorities. This is what we discussed when you were here, to make sure that they're coming back. And if they're not being responsive, I'll never forget when I went to see Pastor Carter over there at Mount Ararat. He had a whole booklet, like, fill out this form. And when you fill out this form, then we can have a conversation about whether or not you want to even come to our church. And so I think that, it's just really time for us to grow up our advocacy as a group, and really just make sure that, we are doing what we have to do in order to hold folk accountable. And quite frankly, a number of our sororities and fraternities across, the country, particularly Divine Nine, has just moved from its 501c3 minded state of mind to a 501c4 state of mind, where we always feel like we are restricted by our 501c3 status, and that we can't get involved in politics and we can't raise money, et cetera, et cetera. But you can do a 501c4 and have a Citadel PAC, political action committee, where you are electing candidates, raising resources for candidates, and not just Citadel, but of course, every one of our organizations across the city of New York can do just that, because guess what? The other groups are doing it. And I think we should do something like maybe an info session on 501c4s, but I'm here for it if you're ready for it.
Thank you so much for all of the valuable information that you shared with us, as well as the reminder that this work in advocacy is a partnership. We also had another question regarding taxes. Right now, we are hearing multiple platform ideas from both the Biden and the Trump campaign. And so what many of us in the community are wondering is what it will mean for us as middle and low income families. And so we just wanted to hear more from you all around information with regard to what this election might mean for us with regard to taxes.
So I want to jump in on this, because from what I understand, and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the most part, these conversations about taxes do not come into play unless you're making $400,000 a year. That ain't me. That ain't my neighbors. Maybe one or two of them. I don't know if they are making that amount of money. They're not letting no one know that. And then, you know, of course, under Barack Obama, there was also increases of taxes, but they were only for people who were making above $250,000. So in terms of the
Assemblywoman,
blow
I must say that, remember that you are talking to Citadel, who is very prosperous, and there may be a number of people in the congregation, because I certainly see like they walk like they may have make over $400,000 a year. So you know they are putting on a little bit.
Well, I belong to the wrong church. Let me call my pastor at Wayside and be like, prosperity is happening over there at Citadel.
No comment. No comment.
But I think it's important what you mentioned about the 400,000, and on top of that, the tax doesn't begin till after the 400,000.
Right.
So it's 400,000 and above, so it doesn't hit till after the 400 grand. The taxes don't 400 grand and under, it doesn't, you know, impact, from my understanding. But I think you're on the right path.
And so, for, you know, at the end of the day, when we are seeing people living in extreme poverty, like people are seeing poverty like they've never seen it before, like people who were making, you know, $3,000-4,000 a month, waking up one day like, oh, I got laid off, I don't have a job, like on the lines trying to find food, and yet and still there are people who are like the heads of Amazon and other corporations making billions and billions and billions of dollars off of us. Why? Because we're the ones sitting there on Amazon like, let me order this and let me order that. Oh, I got my stimulus check. Let me order this. Let me order that. So we're putting billions of dollars into their pockets, and they have a social responsibility to be able to say to the rest of the country, and definitely people here in the state of New York, that they are going to pay their fair share of taxes, because it's also something called tax shelters, which is why people like, you know, DT, who can pay less money in taxes than we pay as, you know, people who make just enough money to be broke, because there are all these other things that come into play. So I think in addition to raising taxes, we also need to take a look at some of these tax shelters where people are sort of parking their resources, like charter schools. I'm sorry, did I say that? It's a tax shelter.
So I think you touched on something that's really important, though, the fact that so I do my Wellness Wednesdays where we give out, you know, 500 boxes of food every Wednesday. And the line, people that are on the line aren't people who have been familiar with receiving food and or PPE and or clothing or whatever. The demographics are changing right in front of our faces as the people who need this supplemental food and or income. So that's a terrible sign. And the fact that, you know, people, like you said, who have worked all their lives, who have, you know, contributed to society, have been responsible for our tax base, are now finding themselves needing access to food and PPE and all of these other services. We're moving as a country in the wrong direction 100%.
Thank you so much for your answers to our questions. We don't have any more in the chat. And so, Bishop, we can close at this time.
All right. I'm just grateful for this insight. You know, this pandemic has taught us so much, you know, firstly, as the churches have been forced to close down, and now we are trying to reopen. And we want to keep all of our people safe because we have so many Black and brown people who have pre-existing health conditions, and we want to ensure that they're safe and that they're not going to come to church and catch something or spread something. So, you know, we have our hand sanitizer stations that we purchased. We have our devices to take temperatures for all those who are attending, and we're doing the social distance thing. And we're wearing our mask, and we're trying to educate our people to tell them that this is going to be with us for a while. I've even heard something about maybe even a twindemic coming during this flu season. So we're just trying to keep our people informed. We're trying to do everything in our power to let them know that, you know, we're here for you. So we take our resources that we have and we try to give out food as often as we can, because as the councilman said, we're finding that more and more of our people who have been working every day are in need of food for their families. So in addition to that, I've got my ticket. I'm ready to go to the poll. I'm ready to vote out 45 and vote in 46. That's what I'm ready to do. I'm ready to do that. I'm trying to get my people to do that as well. And with all this going on, with all this happening, sometimes it seems as if we still haven't done enough. We still haven't scratched the surface for what we can do to make things better and to increase the quality of life. I'm grateful for our team here at the Citadel Cathedral. I'm grateful for the men's department, the women's department. I'm grateful for Elder Davis and Sister Bronte and Dr. Edison. I'm grateful for Joy Williams and Latrice Walker and Councilman Robert Cornegy. I'm grateful for all of you that participated in this tonight. In my closing, I'd like to say that we're not going to be defeated, that we are going to make sure that our voices are heard, and we're going to get everybody to the poll that's 18 and over. Some way, somehow, some way, we're going to get them there as we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors to make our vote count. So, this is my little 1 cent that I can do. If everybody else across this city does their 1 cent, we'll get to 100. And those are my closing remarks. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for sharing. To our electing officials, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy calendar to come and to share with our concerns in this town hall meeting. Are there any other comments?
So I'll just say in closing that, so thank you so much, Bishop, for having me. And this was a great conversation. I really loved it. One of the things that we talked about was sold to the poll. And sold to the poll, again, was that last Sunday before Election Day when early voting existed. And in this round, it's going to be Sunday, November 1st. The polls will be open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And it is my hope that we can be drum majors for justice and sound a loud drum that on Sunday, November 1st, that people are going to stand up, as our AG say, in quiet dignity and march as one group to the polls for early voting, if you have not voted already, to make sure that we're getting all those last minute votes so that we can do everything that we can across this country, not just, of course, here in the great borough of Brooklyn, in the great state of New York, but to contact all of your people everywhere to say that November 1st is our day in quiet dignity on behalf of our ancestors to lodge their vote because they didn't have the opportunities that we enjoy today. So again, God bless you. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to continuing along in the dialogue.
And I'm sorry, I just want to close by saying that I would be remiss if I didn't point out the opportunity that we find ourselves in as Black people. We have an opportunity to pivot and shift. And when this country opens back up and when our communities open back up, we have an opportunity to use our $3 trillion in spending power as a Black community to reinvest in ourselves. Because what we found is when we've had this moment in time, we've patronized our local businesses. We've begun to take a solid look at Black-owned business. I'm saying that we should stay right there. So while there is crisis and much despair, opportunity arises out of that. I'm hoping to seize that opportunity as Black people and make sure that we continue to support each other, support our ecumenical community, pay our tithes, go and support our local businesses, and create an ecosystem once again that supports each other. We have that opportunity. There's nowhere to go but up from this point, and up together as a mighty people that we are. So that's what I'd like to close by saying. There is opportunity in this crisis for us to re-engage in our communities, re-engage in the church, and reinvest in ourselves and come out of this in a way that nobody could have ever imagined.
All right, if there's no one else that would like to say anything, I'm just beaming because I've enjoyed everything that I've heard. It was so informative, it was so enlightening, and it was so needful. And I am of the school of thought to say, yes, we are onward and upward, and we are moving forward. I have a theme that I say, my church, we have t-shirts to that regard, moving on. And certainly after this pandemic and all that's been going on with white supremacy and voter suppression and everything else is happening with us now, it is time for us as a people, brown and black people, to be moving on. Onward and upward and backward, never. So we're grateful for each of you for participating in this town hall. And this is just the first of many. We're hoping that we can call on you again and again, because an informed people and an educated people is a powerful people. So thank you so much. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you, lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, success, prosperity, perfect health, long life, wealth, riches, favor of God. May there be shalom in your home. Go and vote.